You know, test driving cars isn't all it's cracked up to be. You have to start impossibly early, work long hours, and at the end of it, well, you have to evaluate a car I may not even like. But, you know, sometimes it's all worthwhile. This week, it's the Viper. They say there's no substitute for cubic inches when it comes to developing raw, unadulterated power, and the Viper proves the point. Simply an 8.3-litre V10 engine negates the need for much of the fancy engineering employed in other ultra-high output designs. Rather than overhead cams and fanciful intakes, this lump relies on a 2-valve per-cylinder pushrod motor to deliver its 500 stampeding horses. Add to that an earth-shattering 525 pounds-feet of torque at 4,200 RPM, and the result must be experienced to be truly appreciated. Reading the numbers sends a shiver up your spine. Strap yourself in, crank the engine to life, and that shiver becomes reality as the tiny hairs on the back of your neck bristle as you walk towards a ton in 4 seconds. You know, you don't so much get into the Viper as you do fall in. But once you get behind the wheel, it's well worth the effort. The seats are fabulous, and the pedals and steering wheel are no longer offset as they used to be in the previous car. When you get to the gauges, well, they're now clear and concise, meaning you can read them even at the alarming speeds this car's capable of. There are, however, 2 drawbacks, and both of them have to do with heat. The first one, the heat generated by the engine and transmission when you start driving this car, well, it radiates back in through the central tunnel and up through the gear shift lever. It's enough, in fact, that even on a relatively cool day, you've got to leave the air conditioning turned on. The second place that heat's an issue, well, it has to do with the side pipes. As this warning label says, this sill plate gets very hot. And whilst it won't burn you, it sure does get your attention as you climb out. Matched with the motor is a 6-speed manual box that is remarkably refined. The throws are short, the gate well defined, and unlike most in this league, it does not take both feet to depress the clutch. As a result, it is entirely possible to drive the Viper in a civilized manner despite the horsepower. From here, the power is relayed to the road through a limited slip diff and a truly massive set of tyres. 275/35/18s up front and 345/30 ZR19s in back. You know, one of the biggest improvements to this new Viper is to the brake system. It takes 500 horsepower, 8.5 seconds to get this thing up to 160 kilometers an hour. It takes less than 4.5 to get it back to rest. That means this thing's got some of the best binders the world has to offer. Reaching this level of performance was not easy. Given the tremendous speeds at play, the engineers asked the supplier how the anti-lock brakes would react when hammered at 320 kilometers an hour. The answer the team received was short and sweet. Dunno, we've never tried it. So Dodge tested the system at 270k. Initially, it was a hair-raising experience. However, repeated tweaking brought the system to where it is today. The lone complaint is that the brakes are not incorporated into some sort of electronic traction control system. Of all of the design changes made to this 2004 Viper, it was the hood of all things that caused the most head-scratching. And it boils down to one simple fact. The old car had a clamshell. That meant that the 2 front fenders and the hood were all moulded out of one single sheet. Now, what they decided to do was to make sure they didn't get it wrong, was ask the owner body. And they turned around and said, you know what, we don't give a darn as long as it gets better brakes and more horsepower, which this car does. The reason that this is such a significant change, the old clamshell, well, it would have cost you $12,000 US to replace it. You can replace both front fenders and the hood for about 25% of the cost. Beneath the composite body, the Viper starts life as a rather bare-bones steel buck to which everything else is bolted. First up is a fully independent double wishbone suspension and rack and pinion steering system. Through the pylons, the Viper showed the composure of a past master. The turn-in afforded by the steering and tyres is razor sharp, and so it thankfully obeys driver input very quickly. Indeed, without this endearing trait, we would not have much of a fighting chance of catching the rear end whenever it disappeared on you. You know, the brakes and engine on this new Viper are simply stupendous. And anybody that underestimates horsepower, well, they have not driven this car. It really does make you wonder how much horsepower really is enough. When you see my performance rating at the end of the show, well, you'll see a maximum 5. You should be thinking more like 10.